Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Rigolini Report. I'm your host, Chris Rigolini, Director of Bands at the Highlands Ranch High School. Today's episode wraps up our Steel Drum Week. We have a special guest with us today. I'll tell you about that in a moment. A couple of reminders for you. We are still doing our mattress fundraiser for one more weekend. Log on to frontrangefundraising.com to support our Highlands Ranch Music Department. Don't forget to put Highlands Ranch and the student's name that you would like to support in the memo line when you go to check out. My classes have meetings now on Mondays. They'll last about 20 minutes, and we will follow the 7-period schedule for our Monday afternoons. It has been posted on the website, and you can see it here. Check out our Google Classrooms for updates as well as the links to all of those meetings. Our joke of the day today is brought to you by Miss Amy Baum. What kind of music are balloons afraid of? Pop music! On today's episode, we have a special guest, Mr. Tom Miller. Professor Miller is the director of the Lamont Steel Drum Ensemble and teaches world percussion at the Lamont School of Music here at the University of Denver. He also owns the world's foremost steel drum music publishing company, Pan Ramage Publications, which publishes not only his compositions, arrangements, and recordings, but those of the world's leading pan artists. I sat down with Professor Miller to chat about steel drums, and here's what happened. All right, we have with us Mr. Tom Miller from the University of Denver Lamont Steel Drum Ensemble. Tom, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking me to be on the Rigolini Report.
No, thank you so much for being here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey with steel pan and how you became such an expert in the field?
Sure. I began playing steel drum. I was a percussion major at the University of Akron in Ohio many years ago, and I was one of the first classes to go through a program that Larry Snyder started there. We were all percussion majors, so we all had background on percussion, but none of us had ever seen a pan before. And these unique, really interesting instruments show up one day, and Dr. Snyder informs us that we're going to start a steel drum band. And so we were very fortunate to have Cliff Alexis, who was at Northern Illinois University for many years. He actually built those pans and helped us get the program started, sort of kind of showed us what, how to do it, what we needed to do. But back in the day, no one really was aware of steel drums as much as the university programs are now. So that's where I got my start, sort of dabbled at it a little bit through college. Didn't really think I would do much with it when I graduated. I was a percussion major and pretty much thought steel drum was going to be a college experience. Well, much to my surprise, I relocated from Ohio to Southern California after graduating, and I fell into a huge steel drum community in California in LA with the Trinidad community, but in the Bay Area with Andy and Jeff Norell, who are two big names in steel drums and have been huge mentors to myself. So between those two camps, I was getting a whole lot of steel drum knowledge and experience, so I sort of went with it. Still being a percussionist by trade, but steel drum was becoming a little more involved in my life. And at that point, I was so interested, I decided to go to Trinidad and go to the source of this beautiful instrument. And I spent a couple months in Trinidad during the Panorama season, which, if you don't know what a Panorama is, it's a huge steel drum competition. I know we have band competitions here in the States. You can think of it similarly in Trinidad. It's a band competition, but with steel drum bands.
Our listeners actually got to hear all about panoramas in our last episode.
Cool.
We talked about Andy and Jeff Norell when we talked about a little bit of history of the steel drum on Monday's episode as well. So I'm glad you brought those guys up.
Oh, these names are old hats. So at this point, I went to Trinidad and was completely mesmerized with the whole history of it, the whole process of it. And I met a composer, arranger named Ray Holman. when I was down there, and Ray was writing beautiful music, and I began. Normally, they don't write the music down in Trinidad; they teach it all by rote and ear. But I was so curious, I began writing down some of Ray's music, and so that I could study it, so I could bring it back to the U.S. and kind of see how do they put steel drum band arrangements together. I mean, I had grown up in college, and I knew how you arrange for concert band, jazz band, orchestra. I had to take those classes, but certainly there wasn't a class on arranging for steel drum band. So between looking at a lot of Ray's transcriptions, between being very fortunate to have worked with Andy and Jeff Norell, they taught me a lot about arranging through working with them. And then shortly after that, I met Ellie Manette, who I think that's another name you know from your reports. And Ellie also opened my eyes into the playing, the arranging, the history of steel drum. So I felt really fortunate to have had all these mentors at a young age. Where I started taking it from there is I started to perform on it more. I started to write more. I started to play it not just in steel bands, but I started playing it in other ensembles I was involved in, jazz groups, pop groups. I would pretty much just try to incorporate it in any gig I was going to do. So that not only could I get more experience playing it, but I could also spread it to people, how it could be used. And I would say just over the years, just trying to hone my craft of writing, playing, arranging, it sort of just became a passion that really I got caught up in, happily so.
That's really cool. And for our students, you can see how an interest or a passion that was kind of a side deal became a full-time career and became a full-time job. So students, don't forget to explore those passions that you might not be what you think you're going to go into, but sometimes it ends up working out really well for you.
Yeah, it did for me. If you had asked me in college, are you going to be a professional steel drummer? My answer would have been no.
Right.
So it's
very cool. Well, what would you say the state of steel drums are today in the United States? What is happening in the world? What's new and exciting, and where do you see it going in the future?
Yeah, I think in the United States, what's exciting is programs at the elementary, middle school, high school, university, and community basis level just keep growing and expanding. I tour the country a lot doing clinics and workshops for these various programs. And I'm just always really impressed when I go back to a region, how someone will say, oh yeah, so-and-so just started one 4 miles from here, and so-and-so just started one a mile from here. So they keep growing as an educational ensemble. And I think that's a really, really great movement. So many people, when you have other instruments, you have to learn techniques, embouchures, various things that are important to the instrument. And with a steel drum, there are techniques you need to learn. But I think the idea that it's a little more accessible from day one makes it appealing for community programs, where you might have really small children, you might have adults, and so it becomes accessible. That's a really nice thing. Music is being written for it more and more. When we were playing steel drums when I was in college, there was no music for steel drums. It was all pop tune transcriptions. We had to play all pop tunes. Not that that's a bad thing, because I still love playing pop tunes on steel drums. But now people are writing music for steel drum ensemble, just the way composers write music for wind ensemble, specifically for wind ensemble. Now people are writing specifically for steel drum ensemble, which is a really, really refreshing and great thing. People are using steel drums more in jazz groups, not just in steel drum bands, but as a jazz instrument. You're seeing them in wind ensembles. You're seeing them in orchestras, just as another instrument for orchestration and color. And I think that's a direction that we need to go. So all of you students out there, if you're going to start composing, think of the steel drum as a color in your composition somewhere. That would really be exciting to see in the future.
We also are seeing steel drums even in the marching arts and the pageantry arts, in
Yeah.
indoor percussion ensembles and out on the marching field. And you mentioned Andy Norell earlier, who we've talked about on this program, but he was a big proponent, I think you would agree, with bringing steel drums into the jazz world with his work that he's doing over in France and all of those things in the past, I don't know, 30 or 40 years that he's been doing that, it feels like.
Yeah, he's done a lot. He's done a lot for that, as well as his brother Jeff, as well as Othello Molyneux, as well as Bugsy Sharp, Robert Greenidge. Right, these are some of the names where you see the instruments popping up in other settings other than steel bands. So those are some names to look out for as well.
Very cool. And if you had to tell somebody who knew nothing about steel drums one thing, what is the one thing you want everyone to take away and know about this world of steel pan?
I think I'd like people to know that the steel drum is a fully capable instrument on all levels, in all genres, for all styles. We tend to put it into a little corner of, oh, that's a great instrument if you want to play Caribbean music in a steel drum band by the beach. Some people still have that attitude, and that is changing. It really is changing. But I think I'd like people to know that this is a full-blooded, full-on instrument that can hold its own in any setting, from orchestra to jazz band to anything, as well as featuring it more as a solo instrument. I think if I could encourage composers to write for it more, for solo pieces or chamber pieces, that would be something I'd like composers to know.
Very cool. Where if our listeners are interested in all of this, where can they go? What resources do we have that we can lead them to, where they can learn more about steel pan or possibly even join a group? Are there local groups we should be looking at?
Well, there isn't a national organization called National Society of Steel Band Educators, NSSBE, that has a website with some really nice free research, accessing research articles, videos, things of that nature. So from an academic standpoint, if you want to learn more, that's a great website. It's called weteachpan.org, O-R-G. And so that's a great source for finding articles and videos and things that give you history as well as new pieces and whatever, and that is a standpoint. In terms of local, at our community level here in Denver, we do have some community programs. Rocky Mountain Steel Band in Aurora, Rick Henson runs that, and that's really a great program. Up in Brighton, and I don't think anybody down here lives up in Brighton, but in that area there's Pan Generations. Don Prorak teaches that program. I do a program at the University of Denver, which obviously is for the university community, but we do concerts 3 times a year, and that's a great place to come and check out the steel band performances live. Yeah, I would say other than that, you can do the Google search. YouTube has tons of steel drum videos. You've probably even seen some already on the report, but there's plenty of activity going on even at the local level.
Very cool. Well, Tom, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate you taking the time to come on and answer some questions about steel drums. Hopefully we can have you back on soon to talk about a variety of other topics. But we really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Love it. I enjoyed it, Chris. Thanks for asking me.
Thank you again to Mr. Tom Miller for joining us today. Well, that about wraps it up for the report. If you like what you heard and you're interested in finding out more information, check out the links in the description. I've also linked all of the organizations that Professor Miller was talking about during our interview. If you want to contact me, you can always do that through email, cregolini@dcsdk12.org. Don't forget to keep sending me those jokes of the day, and if you have any ideas for what we should talk about next on the Rigolini Report, join us next time when we talk about the harmonic series. Until then, happy practicing!